Okay, well, thank you very much for having me come and speak to all of you. Um, I haven't done a whole lot of this, speaking to students per se, but I appreciate the opportunity. Um, the professor had provided me a kind of several topics or questions that maybe I could elaborate on and follow with, and certainly at the end of those, I'm open to any questions. So I'll just introduce myself. So, James Grandy, and I've been with the RCMP since before 2007. I started as an auxiliary constable back in Penticton, probably in 2004, I think, and then got to go to training in Regina in 2000, end of 2006, and started in Burnaby and spent the first 8 years in the Lower Mainland in general duty policing, community policing, and also a mental health liaison unit. Essentially, the idea behind that is that we were seeing an increase in clients, members of the public that were clearly suffering from mental health issues. And certainly that was not something that police at the time, or even now for that matter, were skilled at handling or helping. And they wanted someone to spearhead that and have some kind of relationship with the local health authority in Burnaby, being Fraser Health, to kind of have a collaborative approach to dealing with, certain clients that were in the community that were uh, either calling police regularly, either the subject of police complaints, but their primary issue was that they were suffering from a mental health issue in which frontline officers, especially, just weren't able to deal with, and they were clearly best um, handled by the health authority. So I finished that, and I got transferred to Oliver in the South Okanagan, where I did 4.5 years of general duty policing there in a small town environment, which was very different than the Lower Mainland. In Oliver, often working by myself, backup being the best times maybe 20 minutes away in Asuyas. It could be upwards of 40 minutes from Penticton, and Oliver was a lot busier of a place than what I expected it to be, but it was a great experience, certainly a true RCMP experience, I would say. And having, you know, I know on the Lower Mainland, my experience is, you go into a mall or you go to a call and there's the general public there, and my experience was that most people kind of want to look the other way, and they don't necessarily want to come up and talk with you or engage with you. They kind of just, they don't want any, I don't really know what it was, but it wasn't they weren't necessarily against police, but it's just people tended to mind their own business in that sense in Vancouver, in that area. But up in a smaller town, especially in the South Okanagan, and I imagine it's the same in other small communities everywhere, probably, is that the communication between community members, citizens, is a lot more open, a lot more. You have to be available to talk with everybody, and you talk with them in a different way because they all know who you are and where you live. So it's a bit different, different type of communication in that sense. So then I transferred to Penticton, which is about 40 minutes north of Oliver, and continued rolling out a mental health liaison position for Penticton because they also had a great need for that. And as part of that, I also took on the media relations and communications role for Penticton. And during that, I took a week-long RCMP communications and media relations course as part of that. And when I went back to the detachment, it was basically my role to roll out media releases and to take and facilitate answering media questions regarding certain investigations or high-profile cases that may have come in. And so I gained a lot of experience in that sense. And I have a question on here, why I chose to be in policing, and I don't know. That's a really hard question. I think I remember probably 5 years old or even before that, I've always wanted to be a police officer. I don't know where I got that from. Might have got it from watching TV, probably. I don't know. But that was always something that I wanted to do. And certainly that progressed into wanting to represent Canada, and the RCMP. That's the number one thing. You always have the Canada flag in the background, and that seemed like the best way to do that. But also, to be responsible and to be recognized for somebody who's can be uh, asked to help other people. It was really important, and I think that's where it's landed for me is that kind of responsibility to help others. And certainly it's also extremely interesting, as one could imagine, but also quite challenging in that sense. The experience for me has ups and downs, certainly. Going into it, and certainly even going through training and all that, they don't really set you up to know what things you're going to experience, and then crisis that you're going to be exposed to, and you don't really know how you're going to formulate that in your brain, or how you're going to compartmentalize that and deal with that. So everybody's different, and every situation is different. So certainly there have been some things that I don't necessarily wanted to see or have to deal with, but you just pull through it. And I think it's interesting how the training kind of sets you up for at least focusing on what you have to do, the tasks at hand, and you just deal with the situations as such, and you get through them, and that. So, but no, it's been it's good. I also appreciate the role that I'm in now, which is kind of I now work out of Kelowna, and all I basically do is communications and media relations. So, basically for most of the southeast district of the province. So especially for smaller detachments that don't have a media relations officer, and they need news put out, or they have reporters asking questions about a certain case, then it would go through me, and that would include things like homicides and other major cases that come up. Yeah. I don't know whether I want to stop and anybody wants to ask any questions, or I just continue down the list of notes on topics, or.
I have myself muted, so it takes me a minute to respond. Does anybody, the corporal's asked, does anybody has a question at this point? Does anybody have a question? I don't know. I don't see any questions. So yeah, please keep going.
Okay.
They're fascinated.
Oh, good. Yeah, so I think one of the questions here basically was what will be my most interesting cases. I think as a police officer, there's been several interesting cases, but certainly as a media relations officer, and I just started this specific role in March, where I am right now. And there was a death of 17 horses, wild horses, on reserve land near Kamloops earlier in the year. And the death of those 17 horses was deemed to be purposeful. The reason for it, the motive for it, I think is still unknown, but it certainly garnered a great deal of interest, not only from news agencies and people within the province in that area, but all over the world. It was kind of interesting to see how animals and cases that involve the suffering of animals, or in some cases resonate more than humans, for sure. So, I had inquiries from BBC, NBC, and in addition to, the usual Canadian broadcasters. So I think that was interesting. For obviously it was a tragic situation, and so it just highlights the importance of communications, but certainly in police communications, that wording and how you present certain cases, to be very cognizant of different people and their feelings towards these types of sensitive topics. So, because I really don't know where it's going to land. It could come. Sometimes there's releases for things that I figure, I'm going to get lots of calls and people are going to ask lots of questions, and it just gets I get nothing, versus something like this. It's just the phone rings off the hook for a week. So it's interesting from that perspective. Let me see here. Just, I guess, some clarification. So yeah, no, I enjoy the frontline policing. I enjoy being out on the street, dealing with things as they came. You know, uh, 911 calls, all sorts of interesting things. But certainly, I enjoy. I needed a bit of a change, and I think every police officer needs a change at a certain point. You can't do that kind of reactive frontline work for very long before you need some kind of break, some kind of change. So for me, this is also equally rewarding because it's very different, but I'm also able to express the good work and often challenging work that our officers come across on a daily basis. And being able to communicate that appropriately is so crucial. Every word that everybody reads can be misconstrued or misunderstood so easily. So it's just so important that I and other media relations officers and even people in high levels who communicate on behalf of the membership are really cognizant of that. And certainly nowadays, with having to be careful and cautious of words that may offend so many different groups, so many different types of communities out there, it's important as well. But also communicating to the public and trying to get them to understand as best we can without giving too much away, but getting them to understand why we do things the way we do it. And I think that's a lot of the problems come because people just don't really understand. They get a lot of their information from sources such as TV and that are just not real, and that's just not how it is. But they just don't understand why or how. So part of my mission is to try and fix that, and where we can, because in some cases it's just been left to, oh well, we'll just tell them this and they'll figure it out. We don't really care. We don't need to tell the public this or the reporter that. But that ends up biting us in the rear, because they either make up their own idea of what we're saying, or they think that we're hiding something, or something that, it's always nefarious. We're always hiding something, or there's a reason why we're not telling them. But part of my thing is trying to explain, well, we know we didn't provide this, or we say it this way because, an investigation and the rules of law, and also the way the court system is, and to protect the rights of, victims, witnesses, and the accused, especially. We were just not able to maybe disclose a lot of details, a lot of information that maybe, 10, 20, 30 years ago was freely given out. And things have just changed, especially in the judicial system, the court system. It's just difficult, but it is equally still important that we communicate to try and kind of explain why we do things and reduce that miscommunication. And one of those things is, we learned, I certainly learned a while back, is that when a reporter calls and says, oh yeah, no, I just want to know this and that, but it's off the record. Well, we've learned that nothing I say or any other officer is off the record. So that's still something that reporters say and that, but yeah, no, nothing. Anything I give to one reporter, I really have to give it to everybody. There's a lot of cases, even recently, that reporters in small towns have requested, oh, well, a while back, the investigators would sit down with me and kind of give me an overview of this homicide investigation. Whereas now you guys aren't giving me anything, and you give it to everybody. Whereas I'm trying to be proactive and get this information. Another one of those educational points is that, well, the problem is, if we give you something, then a reporter in the next community is wondering, well, why didn't I get that same information? And it just begins to start some issues, favoritism, other things come out of that. So anything I write or we give out, we basically have to disseminate to everybody. And that goes across the province, gets posted to the RCMP news site. Everything's just forthright, disclosed. So And as part of that, anybody anywhere can see that and may read that. And so making sure that it's written in a way that's sensitive to all groups and nationalities and that such is equally as important as well. I'm just trying to look through some of my speaking notes here. Yeah, one of the things as part of that, and it's one of the things that actually happened recently, is that a local reporter had there was a homicide or a suspected homicide in a community, and that reporter wasn't really getting much, which is common right from the get-go, because we don't really release or probably even know much right at the beginning of some of these cases. So he didn't get as much as he wanted. So he reached out to some people that were close to the victim, and he interviewed them, and they were, I guess, willing to provide him a statement that he could use. Unfortunately, that statement, which he ended up publishing, provided a lot of very inaccurate information. So, which ended up causing a problem for the homicide investigators, because they were still looking for witnesses, and they were still looking for people and information at this point. And this kind of stuff went out, especially over social media, and kind of changed, or had the potential to change, what people maybe were willing to say or had seen. And that becomes a problem, especially in court. Comes into question. So that was actually an issue that the homicide investigators wanted me to address with the reporter. And that was part of his, well, I got this firsthand information, and that may be true, but at the same time, he should also be aware that depending on what information that him and other reporters putting out there, it could, in the end, do injustice to the justice process, essentially. So, I kind of explained that to that reporter, and I guess he kind of understood. But that's where the danger comes. But especially with smaller communities, and that's another reason why we typically will not sit down with a single reporter and provide them their own information just to that reporter. And typically we don't want to release any more information that is absolutely necessary for the public to be aware of, unless that information is going to help progress the investigation. By us giving that information, that might aid in the investigation. Otherwise, if there's no public safety risk or there's no investigational need to release certain details, then we're not going to do that, because in the end, all that's really going to do is potentially damage the investigation and the court process in the future. Yeah, certainly some of the more vulnerable cases, the things that I've had to speak on are things where children have died as a result, or certainly happens a lot in this province, especially this part of the province, is tragic, fatal accidents. And it's certainly going on camera, trying to balance that need to communicate that empathy and that emotion, but at the same time be really objective, is sometimes a balancing act. Especially, that was evident in the wildfires that we saw here up in Kelowna. You had a lot of people that were outside of their home watching TV. That was probably their main source of information. So making sure that that information was really accurate and timely was sometimes difficult. By the time that information got to me, and then by the time that news agency wanted an interview, and it was really making sure and double checking that information was valid. And so those have certainly been some difficult. That was one of the most difficult times, certainly for me, recently anyway. Yeah, I mean, as part of that, and as part of what we do, my main thing is we have 3 basic points that we really want to convey when we write or when we present on camera. And it's basically, the public really wants to know, are we safe? Am I safe? So, in that release, it's, we try to make sure that we kind of convey that. And the public also wants to be reassured that the police know what they're doing. So whether or not that's making sure that they're aware that, we have all the resources in place, we're bringing in more resources, we have people trained in this, we're on the ground, making sure that we're communicating that, because that gives the sense to people that, okay, well, they've got the resources, they've got the expertise, and so we figure that they know what they're doing to keep us safe. And then the third one is always, can we trust you? And that's public trust for police is essential. Making sure that the public trusts us is extremely important for the entire community, essentially. If we can't trust the police to do the job properly and do it legitimately, then we're all in trouble. And so making sure that we focus on those three areas. Am I safe? Do you know what you're doing? And can we trust you is kind of like the forefront of a lot of media releases, for sure. Yeah, I don't know if
So Corporal, yeah, picking up on that last thing, so what do you have to do to get public trust? I mean, how difficult it is, and what do you have to do?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with communication. To be honest, my experience is, not, it's as I say, it's a fine balance between providing too much information and not enough. I think explaining things a little bit better is really important, because I think the public just, if you don't explain things properly, then they just assume that they just make up their own idea of what you're talking about or what we're doing. And so I think trust has a lot to do with communication and trying to get that understanding, which oftentimes is really difficult because we're just not able to release, specific details, even especially about how we go about doing things.
So how would you advise somebody just coming on as a communications officer? What would you say to the officer? Don't do this because you'll lose trust.
Oh, well, that's a good question. Well, I think certainly not making yourself available. Not picking up the phone, not getting back to people on time, even if you reply to somebody and you tell them, I can't say that, or no, I don't have that information. At least making sure that people feel as though they've been validated and they've been heard, essentially, is extremely important, not just as in policing in general. It is very important. It's a source of a lot of complaints, is just officers just not returning phone calls some cases. And that's usually because they just don't have the ability or time to do it in a timely manner. But certainly as a communications officer, that's extremely important. I think I try to get back to people as soon as I can, and maybe they're not happy with the answer, but they can't say that I didn't try my best to get back to them and they weren't validated in that sense. And so I think that's really important, is not to let things go for too long and try to respond to people appropriately. And there's all sorts of questions and concerns that people ask that are some, you can roll your eyes at, but at the same time, they're rolling their eyes at it because, or they're asking those questions because they probably just simply don't understand. They need direction. So yeah, timely communication is important.
I imagine that you have to control how you look, control your facial expressions. Was that something that was easy for you or difficult? Like always, you just use the expression "roll your eyes," so you can't roll your eyes.
Yeah.
Did you have to learn to do that, or did it come naturally to you?
No, and that's certainly part of the training. But as I say, it's only you only have 2 days or so on that, maybe 2 half days, and they put you on camera and they kind of present questions to you, and you're being recorded. And, after that, they're kind of gauging, well, your moves. One of the biggest things is people move side to side. They don't even realize it, but they kind of waver, side to side, things like that. But yeah, you're right. Things as simple as rolling your eyes to a question. If I'm talking to somebody in person that's not in that capacity, I might be something I do involuntary, you don't really think about it, but on camera, it can look very bad. So
Yeah,
it is,
nervous,
really important.
nervous tics, like you say,
Yes.
it gets exaggerated on camera. You don't realize because you're probably not fully conscious of the close-up shot. The camera may be at a distance to you,
Right.
and so in your training, they video you, and then you can watch yourself reacting to
That's
that.
right. That's right.
Did you see that happening when you were doing your training? Did you, did it come naturally to you, or did you say, "Oh my gosh, did I do that on camera?"
It wasn't so much that, but it was certainly things like saying a lot and doing those filler words in sentences. You just don't think about that unless you hear yourself record, Um, so that, I know I still work on that. I think a lot of people do, but that's certainly, that is realizing the filler words that you use is interesting, and try to cut down on those.
Mm. When you did your communications training, what surprised you most about the training?
Um, hmm. Well, I think what surprised me most is that they give you that weeks long training, which, goes over a lot of policy, and that there's not a whole lot of practical. As I say, 2 half days in front of a camera where they kind of assess, oh yeah, how you speak, and you're making any funny movements, stuff like that. But then a lot of officers, because I'm not the only one who's trained in this, obviously. Sometimes there's officers who are frontline officers that get trained in this, and smaller communities, and they're asked to, maybe once in a blue moon, they're asked to talk to a reporter or talk to a camera. And so without that practice, it's kind of, maybe not necessarily comes across that great. But my surprise was, because we're small, a lot of us are small town policing, is that we're put in positions to represent, speak on behalf of sometimes high profile things with not that much of experience in some cases. It's fine for me. I've been doing it for a while. I've had that ability, I've had that time to practice that kind of thing. But a lot of officers take that training, and they only use it once in a while, but they're being put out there. So it's kind of, it was a little bit surprising at first. I thought, well, don't you have special people that's all they do? Kind of, that's, you get those people to do it all the time. But no, I mean, in some cases they have to ask upon just regular RCMP officers to put out releases or speak to the media, because there's no other option. But yeah.
You talked about in your career path going into a mental health unit, and then it sounded like that in some way uh, became part of the move into a communication officer. So why did you want to get involved in a mental health unit in the first place? And then why on earth did you want to become a communications officer? Because not all officers want to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot don't. Um, for me, it was, I, over the years, began to see that my way of communicating with people, especially people that were in great crisis and maybe were suffering from something like a mental health crisis, or I was able to de-escalate those situations quite well. And I didn't realize that after a while. I was like, oh, well, maybe it's how I'm saying it or how I'm doing it. But they seem to, I seem to be able to resolve these, uh, in some cases, a lot better than other officers who maybe didn't have that communication style, or in some cases just didn't have the patience to stand there or sit there and talk with somebody for an extended length of time. But and I guess that just developed into talking with the people in the community and doing presentations, and then me getting more uh, confident in that. And then also the opportunities coming up. I just happened to be in a situation where these opportunities to be in these roles were available, and so I just took them on, and thought, well, you know what, maybe I can use those skills for something different, in my opinion, equally, in some cases, equally important. So, yeah, that's how I ended up doing this full time now since March.
What do you think it was about your personality and character that made it relatively easy for you to communicate with people who are mentally health, communicate with people in crisis? Now that you reflect on it, and reflect on yourself, what do you think it is about you?
Mhm. I really think it comes down to patience. In a lot of cases, people just want to be heard, and a lot of times people aren't heard, and a lot of officers are not interested in spending that even extra 5 minutes. It's like, okay, well, we've resolved the issue. This is what's going to happen. Do it or don't. And in my sense, that rarely ever turns out very well. And if you just put in a few extra minutes to listen, or equally after you're listening, trying to communicate to that person about the reality of the situation and giving them some options, um, people are more receptive to that, whether they have mental health issues or not. In general, people are more receptive to being listened to and provided options. So, and explaining to them their options. So I think I just took the time to listen non-judgmentally, and I'm really, as I said, with speaking with media and that, I'm really keen on just education, because a lot of the issues come because people just don't understand what the reason is for something. And if you just kind of give them an idea, oh yeah, this is why we do it, or this is, if you do this, this is what's going to happen, and take the time to do that, it really changes people's dispositions.
Yeah, this is a course in professional communications. It's a fairly generic course, but the cohort here is in the police and justice studies diploma. And Caleb asked the other day when I was talking about the difference between professional communications and having personal opinions, and Caleb said quite rightly, well, how can you not have personal opinions? So how do you answer a question like that? Because you've got your personal feelings about a situation, but you've got a professional role.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important, especially in my cases. I try to, I might prepare a script, or I might have a written media release that I put out, and sometimes I'll have some questions, and I'll kind of answer those questions based on what I think that reporter is going to ask, or reporters might ask, and trying to stick to that script. I think I haven't had too much experience with reporters asking my opinion necessarily. I mean, I think in my role, I think they understand that I'm representing, you know, uh, the RCMP as a whole. They're not really interested in my personal opinion, but I think that's equally important, is that I don't provide that personal opinion in the first instance there, because it doesn't really. I'm not in a position to do that. In most cases, it just comes down to the facts. I'm just trying to relay the facts, other than in some cases trying to express, some emotion. Obviously, when I'm speaking about things that are kind of tragic, um, that's not really maybe a personal opinion per se, but trying to provide a personal spin on it, because people want to see that. Obviously, they want to see some humanity in that. I may be the only person who's going to speak that they might see speak about a certain tragic situation. So it is important to be cognizant of that. But yeah, personal opinion. I don't really have a whole lot of that, because I don't think they really are interested in my James Grandy personal opinion. Um, but yeah.
So that's not difficult for you to compartmentalize your personal feelings from your professional role.
No, not really. I think I do it the same way as I would do it if I was responding to a specific occurrence. You know what? I have a job to do. I know kind of the steps on what I need to do to accomplish that goal, uh, and you just follow through with it like a job. So, and that's really the best way to do it. Obviously, um, some of the cases that come across my desk, or that I have to speak to or write to, or even some of the cases that I don't do either, but I have to read about. be aware of them are disturbing. So that's something that one has to compartmentalize, I suppose. Everybody does it differently, but yeah, providing a personal opinion, I don't. It's not something that I feel the need to do, and nor am I really expected or asked to it in many cases. I don't think.
Well, to give some, some more specific examples, say you're dealing with a death, a horrific death. If you say too much, it's not good for, public consumption. If you say too little, it doesn't come across. So in that scenario, when you're dealing with a horrific death or a horrific crime, where are you looking to balance that? How to balance that? How much you say and how much you don't say?
Well, I think it's case by case basis, for sure. But yeah, I do have to be cognizant of, okay, well, I have to add in, in a lot of cases, there's certain lines that are kind of approved lines that we might use in certain situations that are, I'm speaking on behalf of the RCMP, our condolences on behalf of the RCMP and this tragic incident, that kind of thing. I'm not going to say that I personally, I'm upset about this and all, this situation, and that's just not, that wouldn't be appropriate in my role. Speaking on behalf of the entire organization. But
so you would never use personal pronouns. You wouldn't say
yeah, no, I guess no, or I haven't had to at this point. Again, in a lot of cases, I'm not directly involved in those situations. So yeah, as well. So it's no, I haven't.
Yeah. Well, to give you another example, I think you were involved in a case with a bomb threat that came by email or a threat that came by email. A typical question of the media might be, when are you going to catch this person? So how do you deal with a question like that?
Well, that really did come down to, and does come down to, trying to emphasize and trying to communicate to the public that, you're safe. And we know what we're doing because we've got all these people working on it, and we got this expertise in this area, or whatever the case may be, and trying to build that trust through that solid communication, I guess. Just trying to be, in that case, non-emotional, really, because any emotion in that case and similar cases just looks like, well, okay, maybe they don't know, maybe they're worried, so maybe we should be worried, or so in some cases this police communications is a little bit easier in the sense that there's no expectation of really whole lot of emotion in the sense, I'm providing the facts, and of course those facts have to satisfy those three things. Am I safe? Do you know what you're doing? Can I trust you? Kind of points, but ultimately it's just the facts, and and reassurance to the public without a whole lot of emotion. I don't think the public really wants to see a whole lot of emotion, to be honest, from police speaking about things that may be distressing. I don't think that's, usually facts are more effective. But yeah, it is a balancing act for sure.
You mentioned when you were talking about the deaths of 17 horses near Kamloops. It seemed to imply that they were murdered, that it was not natural deaths. And you remarked about how this story, of all stories, spread around the world. You got interviewed by BBC, you got interviewed by NBC. So what were the circumstances in that case?
So these were 17 wild horses, but they were on a reserve, part of the reserve. I can't remember what the name of the reserve was up there. And so the horses were, they weren't necessarily owned by anybody, but the reserve and the people living on the reserve in that area value their existence, essentially, for sure, for many reasons, but also there was I still don't even think we have a motive for it, but somebody had decided to go up there and basically kill all these horses. and for some reason. So we confirmed that it was a purposeful act. Um, and yeah, it really took off media wise. As I can understand, it's obviously from any headline hearing that is distressing, no matter where you live, probably in the world. Nobody wants to hear about 17 dead horses done on purpose, for sure. I think I was taken back by, everybody from the BBC to the United States asking about it and wanting information on it, for better or worse. But, and there's other, obviously, media releases that are put out that never get picked up, which is equally strange. But this one, specifically about animals, and I can understand that, because everybody everywhere loves animals, essentially, generally speaking. So it's a touchy subject for sure. But yeah, interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, who would want to kill wild horses? I mean, was there anything involved in this that people from off the reserve were doing this on the reserve? Like, was there any sense that this is malice directed towards the indigenous people?
Well, I mean, it certainly was towards animals that are held dear by the band, but also, there's similar wild horses roaming on reserves and off reserve as well, but generally that are part of native culture. They do they have a space, and they have a part of native culture. So I can't speak. I'm not going to get too accurate on it, but generally, yes, it could be, it could have been a situation where somebody was trying to send that message to that reserve. We're really not sure, but that's why it was equally important that we did convey the information of that case, and then to try and get people to contact us so we can help solve it. But
I'm sure there's other cases where people want to injure somebody and they do it indirectly by attacking their animals.
yes, no, absolutely. Oh, that's definitely a thing for sure.
Right, right. Were you able to determine what type of a gun and bullet was used?
I'm certain that the investigator there did, but I don't know whether I even released that information, to be honest. That was quite some time ago. I don't know when that was, but it was earlier in the year. So I'm offhand, I'm not really sure. Offhand, what the details
are. Okay. Just looking around the room, does anybody have any questions for the corporal? Okay. I'm not seeing a lot of hands going up.
Okay.
You talked about sensitivity to words and how sensitivity towards words is changing. The semantics and meaning of words is changing. So what would be some of your examples of words you've learned you have to be careful of?
Oof, that's a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of the obvious ones that we can probably all figure that we have to be sensitive about. I can certainly speak to, having the right grammar on things is really important. Today is a perfect example. I'm releasing something regarding a plane crash in which the pilot had deceased, and in the release, somebody had written it, and I had to proof it, basically saying, emergency crews found the pilot, comma, and lone occupant deceased, something to that degree. And so it was misconstrued. A reporter had to ask, so do you mean the pilot and a lone occupant? Or just the pilot was deceased, was in the plane and deceased? And so it ended up being it was just the pilot. But just how it was written, just that easily in that way, could be interpreted both ways. So it could be something as simple as that, to something more critical, not referring to somebody the right way, or, for me, certainly touchy trying to make sure, very touchy subjects, but trying to make sure things are done properly and it comes back to this horse situation, is that involving, native reserves, and how maybe each reserve wants to be referred to in a different way or a different word, and some cases they vary greatly. So making sure that's appropriate, I think, is really critical as well, to not look ignorant and dismissive of.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be a real area you'd have to be careful with. When you're talking about a crime on a reserve, I take it there was no indigenous police force. How do you what are the areas you have to be careful of it in this specific case when you're talking about these horses? And you already mentioned that the horses had a cultural value that maybe non-indigenous people wouldn't pick up on. So what sort of things were you conscious of? You had to be extra careful because you have non-indigenous officers talking about something that happened on a reserve.
No, absolutely. And that's why in that case, I had to reach out to some Aboriginal officers to kind of get clarification, not only how to pronounce the community's name, but also kind of get some background on what it kind of meant to them and how it kind of worked. And that's where kind of I was told that the reserve doesn't really own the horses, but the horses roam on their land, and they're kind of the overseers of the horses and the caretakers of these horses. And so they do have a lot of cultural meaning to them, but this is why, and that kind of thing. So for me, in that case, I knew that I was going to be on camera and I was going to be asked a lot of questions. And I had to also know how to, pronounce the the names of the reserve and that kind of things. So that's really important, just kind of knowing where my understanding lacks, and trying to make sure that I'm keep ahead of that, because I obviously know that I'm going to be asked about those type of sensitive questions, but you have to get in front of that and get educated essentially quickly.
Mm. And, another area of sensitivity that's related to what you're talking about right now has to do with what's happening around the world in BC with the war between Israel and Hamas. There have been some incidents at UBC, I believe. The police there are investigating. If you suddenly today found yourself involved in the communication officer for something related to that, related to Muslims, related to Jewish people, what mental notes would you be giving yourself?
Well, I think in that case, and like other cases, really being able to speak to the facts and keep things on track as the facts. I mean, everybody in this country has to abide by the criminal code and the laws of the country, and and so just trying to keep things, in the sense of, one person can't do something to another person, or, impede on somebody else's rights, and kind of keep it away from the whole political aspect, and try and get down to, well, this situation occurred, or this person did this to somebody else, and therefore that's, against the law, let's say, in this country, and that you can have all these opinions, and you can have the right to demonstrate and protest, of course, but within reason, and within the confines of the rules of the laws and that of Canada. So I don't think, in my case as police, I would be reporting, and we would be reporting on a situation. So a situation as to, somebody broke the law, or a group of people broke the law while protesting. Well, just keep it simple. These people, whether they support Hamas or support Israel or support Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever, at the end of the day, this is what's happened. And those issues aside, you and people in the community have to, and in the country, have to act a certain way within the confines of the laws. I think that's how it would have to happen, and that goes down to not keeping personal opinions out of it and all that as well, because obviously there's really no place for personal opinions in that case either. There's just the facts essentially.
Mm. Corporal, if you were in this classroom today talking to this group, and while you're talking, maybe if mentally you were thinking, who's the person in this class who I would pick as a communication officer? What just in the behavior of the class that you're talking to here, what would signal to you, here's a person who would be a good fit for this job?
Well, I think somebody who's able to really listen. Certainly listening is critical for most aspects of life, but certainly in this job is being able to not talk too soon, and really trying to listen and kind of gather where the person on the other end is coming from, and trying to formulate that based on that kind of understanding. It's sometimes difficult to do that, but and that's why, as I say, keeping things factual and precise, and not kind of veering too far outside of those two areas is really important. So, but yeah, listening and just saying enough and not saying any more.
Mm.
Just saying just enough and not going down too many rabbit holes, I guess.
Corporal, I have to say that when I was listening to you talk, I was appalled to hear you say, because of my background before I came to teach in journalism, I was appalled to hear you say running into a journalist who did not respect off the record. It's such a basic ethical principle in journalism. So I'm aghast to hear that somebody was like that, and of course that damages the relationship. That damages the relationship when you're looking at from your perspective or looking at the perspective of the journalist. And you talked a number of factors about that, how you have to be careful of favoritism, but in some instances working with one reporter or media outlet might be to your advantage. And you also talked about the problem of journalists interviewing witnesses, and that's circulated. And of course, that's a very serious issue. So, and I think you had an answer to that, but just to go back to that, there's a sense you can't control the media, but there's another sense you can control the media. So just going back to that situation, how are you going to deal with that issue of journalists getting ahead of the investigation and interviewing witnesses?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I haven't heard of that occur too often. So in this instance, which was a recent incident, was a little bit outside of the norm for sure. That particular reporter, he expressed some real frustration, and I kind of understand that to some degree. He says, well, I'm a reporter in the community that this incident has happened. And I can appreciate that, you're sending out a release to everybody in the province, or essentially the whole country, on something, but, I should be given a little bit more priority because, I speak for the community, and so there's part of that I appreciated what he was saying. Because that part of that's true. I can understand where he's coming from with that. But then the other part of that, which I had to explain to him, is that, back in the day that made sense. But now everybody wants this information. Somebody in Vancouver wants to know about something that happened up where they are. Is it relevant to somebody in Vancouver that this incident happened? It's not, but unfortunately, it's got to the point, especially with the internet and social media, is that, well, if one outlet has it, they want to report on it. And I think just that understanding and communicating how things have changed in that capacity, even though he's not happy with that. But then he went outside of the lines there, and he decided to do his own investigative journalism, unfortunately, at the same time that investigators are up there trying to gather the same information. And so by posting information that might not be accurate, might be accurate regardless, especially before police have had a chance to obtain that information themselves, is clearly, it's risking those cases falling apart if they got to court, especially. So yeah, no, it's difficult.
Yeah, but there's nothing you can do, right? If that's kind of like an ethical relationship between police and reporters, and I know it's become a more difficult issue because of the internet and journalists from the United States reporting in Canada, and they don't even have to follow the same ethical rules that a journalist in Canada. I mean, I recall seeing this happen in as early as I think the when Karla Homolka, was on trial, involved with her partner Paul Bernardo, and there were publication bans, and the international media, the media from the United States, were not respecting the publication bans in Canada. So even lost that control, that small legal control that you have over the publication bans. Those reporters were just going back to the United States and publishing it, and then being immune to contempt of court over that sort of thing. So and then you've got citizens now. Okay, it's a bigger problem for you, because it's not just reporters that can post statements of witnesses. It's any citizen now can post this, and you can't police now the internet and citizens.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. There's a lot of they're not even news agencies. There's bloggers who have their own sites that want to present the news and want to, and so we have to provide information to them as well. And that's why it's come down to, we only provide a certain amount of information that's, pertinent, that the public needs to know or might facilitate the investigation, and we give it to everybody.
Yeah, I'm watching. Yeah, I'm watching the time, Corporal, because we come to an end of the allotted time. So I want to end by thanking you. Much appreciated for you taking the time to do this, and you're welcome anytime to talk to any class of mine. So thank you very much.
It was a real pleasure. Yeah, no, everybody take care, and I appreciate you having me.
Okay, so we'll sign off now. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.